Let me set the scene for you. Imagine you're going on your honeymoon. You and your partner are very excited, you've gone through security, you're just wandering around duty-free, smelling expensive perfumes, you've had a bite to eat, you're living life. And then you pass by a bookshop. And you're looking for your beach read for your honeymoon. Reminder, this is for your honeymoon. So what funnier title to pick out to catch your eye than this? How Not to Fuck Up Your Marriage. So I absolutely couldn't resist buying this book. And then I realised it was written by James Sexton. James Sexton is a divorce lawyer in New York. He's been on a couple of podcasts I've seen, including he did a really good one with Soft White Underbelly. And I've always been interested in his book, but I don't know, I just forgot, it didn't occur to me to pick it up. So then when I saw it in duty free, I was like, you know what? Now's a pretty funny time to be reading this. So this book will be the first book I discuss in a kind of book club format here on Vocally Annotated, living more up to the podcast name, and yeah, just what better way, what more of a bang could I possibly want to start with? Also, if anyone was wondering why the buy one get one half price sticker is still on, I left it on because I thought it was pretty funny, because my husband and I were both looking around the bookshop and we were both like, I kind of want a book, but I'll get a book if you get a book. Well, I'll get a book if you get a book, and we're both independently thinking that, and then we realised, like, okay. And as you can see, I've got a lot of notes. Like, look how many tabs. I had to go in 3 different columns because I had so many tabs. So there's a lot to discuss. So there are over 40 chapters in this book, and I would broadly split them into 3 categories. You've got pre-marriage, you in the marriage, and your marriage and the relationship itself. There are some other chapters that focus more on kids, but for the purposes of today's video, I'm not focusing on those. And when I say you, I'm referring to the general you. And some of those chapters are just pure anecdotes, so if you like gossip, this is really fun to read, because he's referring to cases he's worked on as the examples, but he's changed all the names, so you don't have to feel bad about it. Of course, this book revolves around marriage as the specific form of long-term relationship, like it says on the tin, but this stuff is also applicable to long-term relationships in general, so it can be applied to a broader range of situations. As a disclaimer, in this book, he refers a lot to heterosexual marriage, and he does have a portion of the book explaining why he does that, and basically what he's saying is that most of his clients are in heterosexual marriages, so he deals with those kind of couples. He does address why he thinks there are less queer clients that he gets, including that it's not been legal that long in the US, so he just hasn't had as much opportunity to have queer clients. I'm going to try and use more inclusive language, but if I default to that, then that's why. There are non-stop fireworks going on outside, so if you can hear that, that's what it is. I can't really put off recording this episode, otherwise I just won't get it done. Pre-marriage. Sexton outlines the main consideration for marriage on page 5. What's the job description of marriage? This is a recurring theme throughout the book, and he ends up elaborating on some things you should consider in said job description. I think the first place to start is with, what do you expect from this relationship? Because how can you find what you're looking for if you can't articulate it? You need to know that when you do meet someone, you're on the same page because you know what it is you want out of it. You need to be clear about it. That's how manifesting works as well, right? Another consideration, what makes someone a good boyfriend or girlfriend, partner, and in this case I specifically mean a partner you're not married to. Is it the same as what makes a good spouse? Which is why I differentiated, because there might be a difference. You might not have such high expectations of a boyfriend, girlfriend, non-married partner, whatever, because they're there to have fun. People like to date to have fun, but you don't necessarily approach marriage the same way, and it's not helpful to approach marriage the same way. Like, for example, one thing he particularly talks about is looking at this person that you're marrying, because again, this book is about marriage, but any long-term relationship, at what this person does with the majority of their time, maybe how they do it, and how they unwind from it. So we're looking at job, how they do their work, and then how they unwind from that. And then he says, are the characteristics that make a good boyfriend or girlfriend translatable to being a good husband or wife? Because what makes someone a good boyfriend or girlfriend isn't necessarily going to be what makes someone a good spouse. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of like, because you're approaching the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship as more casual and chill and the spouse would be more serious. Assuming you are like one of those people you date for marriage and like you take it very seriously, you can still want different things, or accept, might be a different way to put it, accept different things from a boyfriend and girlfriend than you would from a spouse, because you're not building a life with said boyfriend and girlfriend. So one example is you might be with a partner who is more chill about their job than more lax about their work. You're very interested in focusing on your career, climbing the corporate ladder and doing that thing. but your partner isn't. And you might look at that and be like, okay, that's nice, it balances me out and whatever. But then if you actually look like 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and you know that you're still going to be wanting to focus on your career, and your partner's just not that into theirs, then I would argue that doesn't make them a good spouse for you. I'm not saying it only works out when you're both in the exact same headspace, but it's just one of those things where it like might make sense if you're looking at it from a like boyfriend-girlfriend perspective, like, oh, it's so nice that they balance me out and they really bring me down to earth and whatever. But if you're talking about a spouse and you're talking about someone you want to build something long-term with, then yeah, it might be nice to have someone who understands your dreams and goals because they have their own and they want to commit to building that with you, rather than someone who just wants to ride the wave and is not actually gonna build with you. Does this person have the following qualities needed to maintain a healthy long-term relationship? Patience, rational discourse, profound empathy, and the ability to forgive and forget. So that's a little like 4-in-1 deal. I would say these are tenets of a good relationship regardless, but especially someone like your spouse that you spend the most time with, you live closely with, it's really easy for you to get on each other's nerves, but then that's why it's so important to have patience, be able to have rational discourse, be able to talk about things, have the empathy and the ability to forgive and forget so that you don't let it break you. Because he also goes on to say that these are the traits you need to fix a marriage. And had those traits been part of your relationship with this person from the start, you wouldn't be where you are right now. And obviously he's talking about people who end up in his office seeking a divorce. But you need to make sure you and the person in front of you actually has those traits from the get-go. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance. Do you like who you are with this person? Because as he points out, staying married entrenches us more deeply in the habit of being ourselves. Being a partner in a good marriage is a fortunate, fantastic place to be. A place most of us want to get to. Which kind of goes back to that thing that people say, right? Like, don't expect someone to change once they're married. You have to marry them as they are right now, which he also does say earlier on. When he's like, you have to look at the person you're marrying and look at who they are currently and be able to assess that against your job description. But you need to see the person who you're marrying clearly and identify if you're happy with them becoming more entrenched in who they are, if you're happy becoming more entrenched in who you are in the relationship. Do you like yourself in this relationship? Is a really important question to answer. I mean, he says later on that winning at marriage essentially means that your marriage brings you joy, self-improvement, or some combination of the two. That makes the benefits of staying married outweigh the burdens, which is why it's even more important to be able to articulate what it is you're looking for. Like he goes on to say, it's strange that so many of us have wagered all of our assets on a tool without ever articulating more clearly what we are looking for that tool to help us achieve. And does this person truly care about you? For that, his advice is, take a good hard look at the person in front of you. Would you sign up for that person? What motivates them? Do you have the power to motivate them? Where do you land on their list of priorities? Again, I think this is where we look very clearly at the person in front of you and how much they like and respect you and how that's going to affect how you're treated moving forward. Because if you're not in your partner's like top 10 list of priorities, you haven't got a hope in hell of making a relationship work, basically. Because why would I put in the work to have patience, rational discourse, profound empathy, and the ability to forgive and forget with a partner I fundamentally do not care about? And he talks about a common misconception he sees, which is that marriage is not the end, it's a means to an end. The destination is connection, companionship, comfort, and trust. Getting you to the destination is an ongoing process that requires alertness, energy, and consistency. There's a lot that goes into this thing that it's like when you're doing a PhD or even a bachelor's dissertation. They always tell you to pick something that you like and you're interested in, not one that you think will look good to whoever. Pick something that you're interested in, because ultimately you got to put a lot of work into this and you need to make sure that you have enough internal motivation to complete it when it gets hard, when it gets exhausting, when you need to slog it out, which is what he's saying about your partner. Does your partner have that kind of internal motivation when it comes to you? Are they going to go through the slog and everything for you? So I'll run through all those considerations again and have them listed on screen if you're watching the video version of this podcast. 1. What do you expect from this relationship? 2. What makes a good boyfriend, girlfriend? Is it the same as what makes a good spouse? 3. Does this person have the qualities needed to maintain a healthy long-term relationship? 4. Do you like who you are with this person? And 5. Does this person truly care about you? And I think that's a pretty healthy order to go through them in. You need to start with like what it is you're looking for, and within that get really specific about what makes a good boyfriend, girlfriend versus spouse. That brings you onto the qualities you need to maintain a healthy relationship. And then I think the last two are more like if you're in a relationship with someone, do you like who you are with that person, and does this person truly care about you, are like the final finishing touches. But I think it is more important to address if you like who you are with that person, because I think that's way more important. How you feel about yourself in that relationship. It's really important to honestly assess with yourself whether you have this list figured out, because, I mean, as he puts it, if it's hard to navigate ourselves or explain ourselves to ourselves, how can we expect to do it for another person? And I mean, in the same vein, like, how can you find what you're looking for if you don't articulate it? And then with that, once you've found the person, does the person in front of you actually match the list that you made? You actually have something to like compare them against now. This is especially important in the age of no-fault divorce. So in the UK previously, if you wanted a divorce, you had to prove fault through one of the parties, like someone cheated, someone was abusive, or like even if it was an amicable split and the two people just didn't want to be in a marriage anymore, one person would have to move out or something to show that they separated, they left, and that was like the fault in the records. But now you don't need to do that. You can have no fault where no one's at fault, you want a divorce. And a lot of Indian people, okay, that I know or have interacted with, will have already, they like to throw around that like more people are getting divorced these days, young people don't know how to stay in relationships, and they're so happy to leave. And I feel like especially with no fault divorce, that sentiment gets even worse. And it's just such a misconception, which he also does point out. Sexton writes that even in our disposable society and the age of no-fault divorce, it's not something that people go off and do without compelling reasons. So first of all, nice to hear that it's not just like Indian communities that are doing this, but yeah, no one goes and gets divorced for fun. And to emphasize what he says about people not doing it without a compelling reason, that is the key point, right? So having an understanding of what it is you're looking for when you're going into it, assessing yourself honestly, assessing the other person in front of you, helps you effectively avoid having compelling reasons, is the point that he's getting at in this category, the pre-marriage category. And before I move on to the next section, I'm just going to take a moment to address the obvious. This is a book about divorce from a divorced lawyer, and I'm reading it as someone who is newly and happily married. And it seems like those two things are supposed to be oxymorons, like you're not supposed to be able to put them together, like being happily married and reading a book about divorce. Right. I'm sure there are people who are like, you're just asking for trouble, you're just inviting trouble in by even thinking about it. But to me, by not thinking about it, you're setting yourself up to fail essentially, because I think a lot of times our tendencies are to think, like ours as in we as people tend to think that we are so unique and we're so different to everyone else. And while he does talk later on in the book about how marriage can very much be customized to suit you and to suit your partner, ultimately the basics remain the same, which is why he's able to say that you need these 4 qualities to be able to have a healthy long-term relationship, and those equal to the 4 qualities that you need to have a healthy marriage. Like, we're not that different, and so often we try to reinvent the wheel because we think we need to. It's actually like the stuff that worked is the stuff that's still going to work. So in that respect, I feel like we sit here and we're like, oh, we're so unique, I'm so unique, I'm so different, my relationship is so unique and different. What is someone else going to teach me about my relationship? But if you read the common pitfalls, and this is from someone who's been doing this for like 20 years, so he's seen a lot pass through his office, then it's like, okay, maybe these specific things won't apply to you, but you still stand a better chance. It's a very like specific cross-section of society, of a specific society, of a specific socioeconomic group within a society, but we're not as different as we think we are, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel when the systems already exist and are in place and people have the learnings that are already there. I think that applies to a lot of advice when it comes to things like relationships, and obviously we're talking about advice that comes from people who are in good, healthy relationships that we want to emulate, not people who give advice where it's like you wouldn't actually want their life, so there's no point taking their advice. But a lot of them say the same thing. Like, one thing I got told when I got married by someone was like, communication is key, communication is so important. He says that in the book. Like I said, I got told this by someone in my life. I would say it to someone if someone were asking me, that you really need to know how to communicate. We're not reinventing the wheel. And I think there's a lot of value in that, especially considering that marriage is actually a really significant step in your life. Like legally, financially, emotionally, the impact is unmatched. And that's why I'm personally doing this thing where I read all these books and I'm taking an interest to not only, give my marriage a better chance of success, but also dissecting them to help other people have healthy long-term relationships, marriages, because it's so important. It impacts everything in your life. It's not important in the sense that like everyone must follow this preset societal script. It's so important in that if you choose to do it, you are potentially fucking with a lot of things in your life. It's like that saying that like one good man is worth like 10 worthless men, or whatever that saying is. But I really feel that when it comes to partners, there's like one good partner will just compound. The benefits of having a good partner just compound over time. Like my life has improved exponentially. Like it was already improving, I was doing good. But then when I met my husband, it just started to skyrocket because we had that support and I had that person. That's the point. It had a good impact on me. If you're in a relationship that isn't so healthy, especially a marriage because of the legal, financial, etc. implications, then yeah, imagine if you had that exponential effect going the other way. So it's quite interesting to read this book and see how Sexton approaches it like a business deal. And that resonates a lot with me because of how significant marriage is for you as a person and the potential trajectory of your life. Like, just because I sit here and I'm reading books about marriage and I'm talking about marriage, don't get it twisted. I firmly believe that it's better to not be married than to be married to someone who makes your life difficult, causes problems, etc. Like, has that exponentially negative effect on your quality of life. It's not worth it if you're not marrying someone who's good for you. Right, on to the next section. You in the marriage. So this section I feel like boils down to 3 main key points, which is the first one, be self-aware. I think it's best summed up when he talks about how your life, like every life, is going to have lies in it, and a lot of those are going to be lies you tell yourself. But you need to try your best not to do that because you deserve honesty from yourself. He says, listen to your inner dialogue and try to balance and interpret it all. You're probably smarter than you give yourself credit for. And I think this is a really important point that's kind of woven throughout a few different things. Like, for example, when it comes to not lying to yourself, he talks about making sure your behaviors match up with your stated ideologies, so like what you believe in. And he also says that in his opinion, one of the most important traits that strong people possess is knowing their weaknesses. And I think this is so true. Too many people don't want to know their weaknesses. And for me, the biggest problem surrounding this comes from people being critical of other people for knowing their weaknesses. This is especially a problem I've seen in, again, my Indian community. You talk to people and you're like, this is a weakness I have and I'm trying to work around, I'm trying to find a solution to it, or whatever. And so often I have gotten the response of like, well, just do it. Like, just make yourself do it. Effectively, like, just fucking do it. And I'm like, well, that's not so simple, because if I could do it, I would. And what is wrong with me acknowledging that this is a weakness, this is something that I'm not very good at, and I'm trying to find a way to make it work for me, because ultimately I still want to do this thing. Which he also kind of describes when he's talking about making sure that your behavior matches your beliefs. It's like, yes, I have this belief that this behavior is good. I want to do this behavior, but I struggle with it. It doesn't come as easily to me as it does to you. Telling me to just do it doesn't really work. So for example, I do firmly believe that for me, waking up early is better. When I say early, I mean like starting my day around 6, 7. That works really well for me. It makes me feel healthy, it makes me feel more productive as a person, like, it's just good. However, I do struggle with it. I think my natural circadian rhythm tends to lean more late. So then I struggle with going to bed early and therefore waking up early. So one thing I do is whenever I get into periods where I feel like, okay, I've been sleeping late and waking up late, like for too long now, and I need to get back in order, short of just flying to India and flying back, and like the time zone, the time difference fix everything, is I'll set an alarm for 5 o'clock in the morning, drink loads of water, which also helps because I'm dehydrated, especially at this point because it's winter and the central heating is drying me out. And then I'll naturally want to wake up in a couple of hours to go to the bathroom anyway. And then once I'm up, I'm out of bed, like I've done the hard thing. I pushed myself to get up and out of bed, which was the difficult part, right? And from there, it's not that difficult to start my day, or at least start waking up. But then if I were to tell some people this, they would be like, that's ridiculous. If you want to get up early, just go to bed early. I'm like, what problem do we have with people who are self-aware? What problem do we have with people who know their weaknesses? Actually, he was talking about this, and Sexton was talking about this in the book in the context of Mike Pence, saying that he doesn't have one-on-one meals with women who aren't his wife. And so Sexton kind of goes through the pros and cons of this statement, and is like, I can see why it's good, I can see why it's bad, but ultimately, if this is a problem for him, then why are we complaining? Why are we being critical of someone for knowing their weaknesses and doing something about it? I also feel like, even if you don't have that weakness, it's very easy for, especially, bloody hell, especially after reading this, like, I have a new, I feel like a new grasp of how common cheating is. I mean, yes, the sample size is skewed, but cheating accounts for a lot of divorces and stuff. Cheating happens a lot more than you would think in relationships. And so I'm just like, forget whether he feels it's a temptation or not. I'm just like, even if you don't have that temptation, it's so easy for things to go south so quickly. Definitely something I picked up from this, is my point. So why would you put yourself in those positions? And I can definitely also see the argument for how it can be restrictive and blah blah blah, all the rest of it. It just depends on like your personal boundaries, your partner's boundaries. But ultimately, it's not the worst thing to be concerned about in the world, considering how common it is. So yeah, I think we as people, I mean obviously he's not talking about the Indian community, I'm adding that in, but it seems to be, maybe it's a commonality that other communities also have, where it's like people are critical of other people for knowing their faults. And I don't think that's healthy. Ultimately, the point is that the thing is managed, right? So maybe using the Mike Pence example was a bit extreme, but that point about knowing your faults and it being a good thing to know and work with your strengths and weaknesses still stands. Another way in which he talks about having self-awareness is when he talks about arguing. He says, if you're committed to maintaining a long-term relationship, you're going to have arguments from time to time. So it's a good idea to learn how to argue with someone you love and plan to continue loving. This is something I also see a lot of people struggling with, where people are a lot more willing to give you feedback on how you're arguing rather than taking that feedback on themselves and learning how to argue. And ultimately, the advice they give you about arguing mostly boils down to the advice that they want you to apply when it comes to arguing with them. So I suppose you can take it as like a learning lesson and take it as a win in that respect. But not enough people want to learn how to argue in general. And I think this can all be tied up quite neatly with where he says, if I could offer all future clients only one piece of advice, it would be this. Keep in mind how your behaviour would look if you were being cross-examined. And I think that's all I have to say about that. The second thing he goes on to talk about in this category is maintaining your identity and not losing that to your marriage. What this means is making sure you cultivate space in your life for yourself, and like rather than throwing yourself into your marriage because you think it's going to fix your problems and you and me is going to become we, and now the we exists, like no, you are still individuals within that and you still need to give yourself attention. I think a lot of this also comes down, like it's related to being self-aware, knowing who you are so that you can prioritize yourself and you're not, it's a lot easier to shake your sense of self and self-confidence and all the rest of it if you have that strong identity to begin with. I actually watched the movie Mrs. on the way back from said honeymoon. That really elaborates on this whole point, and my god, oh, what a film. It was a good film. It was a good film in the way that Grave of the Fireflies is a good film. Like, you watch it once, you're left traumatized, and then you never touch it again, or you vow never to touch it again. But you go and recommend it to everyone anyway. Mrs. should be marketed as a horror film, I swear to God. Especially if you're an Indian woman and you're married, you want to be married. Horror film, absolutely. Oh my gosh. So basically, the plot of the film is that this woman is newly married, but she's married into a very patriarchal family. and she's not used to it, whatever, and it's like they expect her to do the traditional things like the cooking, the cleaning, the babying the men in the family, and their expectations just become such that it just slowly chips away at her self-esteem. And I knew about this film because I'd seen like clips of it on Instagram and like places like that, but the clips didn't do the film justice. The clips just absolutely did not convey the sheer horrors of this film. The whole thing is just so heartbreaking, because in being a good bubble and like doing the cooking, cleaning, trying to live up to her new family's expectations and all the rest of it, like she completely loses herself. And this is not to blame her, but she lets herself like be subsumed because she has all this other shit to do that she needs to get done, and she can't even begin to have a thought for herself until all this other stuff is done. And it was just, like I said, as a newly married person, happily married person, traumatic to watch, but also really hammered home the point that you need to look after yourself and prioritize yourself. And when you don't do those things for yourself, like your sparkle dulls and you don't shine the way you're supposed to. But it's more than just like, oh, I'm not sparkly anymore. It's so insidious and such a feeling of like my identity is being taken from me, and I'm just, but not even taken, it's just being drained, and I am not a person anymore. I think one thing they did really well in that film was using her, like the colour palette of the main character's outfits, because they start out more vibrant, and as time goes on throughout the film they get more and more dull, and I think they purposely put her in colours that she doesn't look great in as well, to really emphasize like how drawn and like drained she looked and felt from how she was being treated in this environment, and it's horrible. So yeah, ultimately it comes down to doing the things that make you feel like a better version of yourself, so that you can show up as the best version of yourself within your relationship as well, which gives it the best chance of thriving. Like if you think about it, if the other person was like, the difference when they're not showing up as their best self and then they do something to recharge and they are now showing up as their best self, the difference is huge. Let alone when that person, like, these things really impact your life. This other person that you live with, you're emotionally tied to and all that, like their moods really impact your life. So if you create like a happy flywheel, then life is only, well, it's not only good, but you know what I mean. Another key point that he mentions in this kind of section I want to point out is where Sexton says, don't waste your life crafting an advertisement of how great your life is. Get out there and live a great life. And in this case he's specifically talking about like posting on social media. Don't post on socials to show you have a great life, especially at the expense of like actually going out and you're living your life. So I feel like that one's worth throwing in there. And then the final point when it comes to you in the marriage is making sure you're happy, not right. And in this one he goes through a story of one particular client he had who cheated on her husband, and then in the divorce her husband tried to rinse her basically and take all this stuff, and she felt so guilty about her affair that she was happy to let him take it to try and make up for her sins. And he describes it like she was more concerned with being right, or truthfully with being less wrong, than with being happy, which entailed getting what she needed financially and could legally procure from the settlement to better secure her future. And he talks about happiness being the collateral damage of being right. This really stood out to me because I like being right. I do. I really enjoy being correct. Not only do I enjoy being correct, I sometimes enjoy being correct at the expense of the other person's happiness, peace, whatever. Because I'm like, if you're wrong, you're wrong. Like, what do you want me to say? But this was, and I've been told many times, like, you know, sometimes just be nice instead of being right. Let the thing pass. Save the focus, put your focus on maintaining the relationship rather than being correct. But I thought this perspective of it was interesting because he's saying, don't be right, but it's not so that you can be nice, it's so that you can be happy and to focus on yourself. And he goes on to say that this client thanked him for essentially for sticking up for her when she wouldn't stick up for herself, because she wanted to do the right thing, but the right thing, which would never have atoned for what she did, ultimately would have left her less happy, less secure, and just caused more problems in her life than it needed to. Like, the fact that she had an affair had already caused problems, right? She was in the middle of getting a divorce. But it didn't need to cause lasting problems, at least as far as her lawyer was concerned, when it came to her financial settlement and her future security. And I think that's an interesting take on it. I think that being nice instead of being right kind of sounds like bullshit a lot of the time. What even is nice? Nice is agreeable, nice is, you know, going along with what people say, keeping your opinions to yourself, time and place for everything. But I think it's told to women way more than it really needs to be. But when it comes to being happy instead of being right, that is a different perspective. That's a different lens, and that's a lens I can kind of start to get behind. Your marriage and the relationship itself. The crux of this chapter really revolves around the question, if you had to tell the story of your marriage, what would it be? Which I think can be answered by the following, where he emphasizes the need to periodically assess, am I doing my part to take care of the marriage so that it thrives? Because ultimately the story of your marriage or anything is in the little details, and it's the little details that we're talking about doing your part to make sure the marriage thrives. Because it's really easy to miss those details in like the day-to-day, just constant wheel you have to stay on, because that's just life, right? It's something my husband and I have been talking about recently. Before, when we were dating, we used to do relationship check-ins, and we used to do that like once a month or so, and just evaluate like where we were at and take a broader picture view of our relationship that way. Whereas now we're married and we spend so much more time together than we used to, it almost feels like not worth doing a relationship check-in in the same way, because our relationship check-ins used to be a lot of like the little details of like, how are you, what's going on, anything new with you that you want to discuss, blah blah blah. And obviously we still have space for those and make space for those things, but they come up a lot more frequently and just like naturally in conversation now. So it doesn't make sense to approach it in the same way. But one thing we have been talking about doing recently is doing more like broad picture strategy sessions effectively. And I really like the idea. That sounds very fun to me. I do love a good strategy, especially because that does align with the general point that Jim Sexton makes in the book, which is that he approaches it almost like a business deal. And that approach really resonates with me, particularly because of how significant marriage is and like every way it impacts you as a person. It is just a complete upturning of your life, and as someone who's recently married, I don't think enough people talk about that. It feels very much like the thing, like in fairy tales, the book stops at the happily ever after, no one talks about what happens after that, and it's like, yeah, no one talks about what a big deal it really is and what an adjustment it is. And I think that's because so many people, especially in like Indian communities, view it like it's just part of life, it's just what you do. It's the same way people are very nonchalant about having children, but that's a separate conversation. But ultimately that strategy includes the little details as well of how you're living your day-to-day life, so that it doesn't just get lost in the shuffle when you're going through things. So I think that's really important. It also reminds me of this like reel or TikTok or something I saw recently, which was talking about taking care of your marriage with the same effort that you used to plan the wedding. But Sexton does also go through some core components to think about to assess how you're taking care of your marriage so that it thrives. The first place to start is, do you prioritize communication? And this touches on a few different things. So one of the things it touches on is when it comes to sharing responsibilities. And he says, so many of my clients would have benefited from either a more balanced sharing of responsibilities or, at minimum, a periodic update on the information relevant to their life that the other was in charge of. So this comes down to splitting responsibilities across partners. And he says, like, he talks about how some people just completely abdicate their responsibilities. Basically, like, a lot of women will abdicate their financial responsibilities to their husbands because they're like, okay, he handles that, whatever. But then they get stuck in a divorce situation. It's like they don't actually know anything about the finances. If we're thinking about examples in pop culture, Gilmore Girls has a really good example of this in season 7 when Richard has a heart attack and Emily's going through the financial paperwork and she has to call Lorelai to help her because she's like, I don't understand what's going on, I don't know how to do this. And then they're going through the paperwork and she's like, we own windmills. I didn't know we own windmills, what the hell are we doing with windmills? But fundamentally, this section is about creating strategies within a marriage that acknowledge that each party has individual strengths and affinities without building resentment that you or your partner is pulling significantly more weight. And this goes like multiple ways. Like I gave the example of Gilmore Girls where Emily's talking about the finances and how she doesn't know, but then it's also, he applies it to like parenting. Like no one wants to be the more responsible, strict parent. No one should be completely clueless about housework. No one should be completely clueless about the family's finances. And making sure you're making time to communicate about these things. And so that's one kind of communication that he says is really key to prioritize. Another, and this needs to be said, especially for Indian women, women of Indian descent, whatever, I don't care. You need to be having conversations about sex. So serious. I know it's not baked into the culture, but it really is that important. As he puts it, in his experience as a divorce lawyer, a reluctance or fear or ickiness about having such a conversation, as in about sex, makes consideration of an affair easier. Hear what I'm saying. If you can't communicate about sex and have an open conversation about that with your partner, that lack of communication just opens the door for people to have affairs. I'm not justifying affairs at all in any shape or form. What I'm saying is there are things that you can do that work for you, not against you. So if that's the case, why wouldn't you do everything you can to protect against that? I don't mean to prevent that, because if someone's going to cheat, someone's going to cheat, and that says more about them than it does about anything else. But you can still protect against it by making sure you're having those conversations and you're able to talk about these things without shrouding them in metaphor and making it like having to jump through hoops to understand what each other's talking about. Oh, a really good example of this is in Lust Stories, the first one, in Karan Johar's short. That woman, I forget what her name is in the short, but like there's the woman, I'm even blanking on the Kiara something, Advani or something, plays the woman, the wife, in the relationship, and then the husband is played by Vicky Kaushal, and she's trying to tell him that like, hey, I'm unsatisfied with our sex life because you don't prioritize me at all, you don't spend any time on me, you don't even think about women's pleasure. Again, separate, bigger conversation. But the way she says it to him is she does it in kind of a roundabout way because she doesn't know how to talk to him. And then she's disappointed when he doesn't get the message. And it's kind of like, he was never going to get the message. He's not the kind of guy that's going to read between the lines. But also, a lot of men don't know that they're supposed to be reading between the lines because they've not been taught these things. So being able to have those conversations openly and honestly will do your relationship a world of good. Because it's also, I think, there's no point in being like, pretending that it's not important. Sex is a really important part of relationships, whether you like to have it or not. And if you do like to have it, are you having it or not? Like, all these things are really important parts of a long-term relationship, a marriage, and it's really disingenuous to pretend that they're not for the sake of like empowerment. I think it's more empowering for people, and especially women, to know this, to be able to educate themselves on this before they go into it, and then they're put in situations that are like uncomfortable and they're having to use all these roundabout metaphors to try and talk about something that they don't really have any idea about to begin with, like in that short. It was a good 30 minutes, I recommend you go watch it. And I would say that this applies specifically to sex, because there are lots of other difficult conversations one can have in a relationship, like about money, for example. But we're all kind of aware that money is a difficult topic. And then the last thing to consider when it comes to prioritizing communication is, as he puts it, you have to make it about the marriage or the relationship. It can't always be about the things around the relationship. What I'm taking from this is basically, if you have said you're going to sit down and talk about your relationship, you're going to have a strategy night, you're going to do a relationship check-in, whatever, focus on the relationship, don't focus on all the other things. Your mother annoys me when she does this, your brother pissed me off when he did this, your dog peed on my shoes. It's not about the other people. Focus on you two in that moment. Again, like a business, you have to work on the business, not always in the business. When you're caught up in the day-to-day, you're in the business, you have to think about the business, like you have to work on the business, but then focus on the business. Don't focus on all like the markets are doing this and the sector's doing that, and just focus on you. The next core component is asking, when you communicate, are you honest with each other? And here he goes on to say, those dissolving their relationship have a huge advantage over those who are still in an active relationship. They can be totally blunt and honest. Why lie any longer? This thing is over. There's no reason to try to keep the other person happy. They're unhappy with you anyway. We disrespect our partners when we refrain from asking what we clearly don't know about them, when we don't bother to confirm or append what we're so sure we do know. Your partner can't hear what you don't say, and vice versa. Ignorance is rarely bliss for long. I am someone who does prioritize and try to be honest in my communications with my partners, and this doesn't mean I'm mean, which I will come on to in a bit, but I think a lot of people would also say that they like to be honest with their partner. I think the crucial bit here is that someone can't help you if they don't know what you're thinking. The only way they know what you're thinking is if you say it out loud. There are so many people I know who won't say what they're thinking for whatever reason, and they just expect people to be able to read their minds. And as we all know, everyone has said at some point, or has felt at some point, I'm not a mind reader. I can't read your mind, it's not going to work like that. I'm really struggling to talk about this bit without like sounding preachy, because you already did a pretty good job of explaining it. But yes, basically, people don't know what's bothering you unless you say it out loud. People aren't mind readers. You're also not a mind reader. You're not supposed to know what's bothering the people around you unless they say it out loud. Don't rely on the non-verbal communication to get your point across. Just like you wouldn't want other people to rely on non-verbal communication around you to get their point across, you also don't rely on non-verbal communication to get your point across. And sometimes it's like easier said than done, especially when you are caught in that like day-to-day hamster wheel of just doing things and just life. But don't leave things unsaid. Basically, as he says, ignorance is rarely bliss for long. It comes back to communicating, making sure you are continuously communicating with your partner, even when you think that that thing is not going to be something that they want to hear, because it's you saying, hey, you did this thing that upsets me. But leaving it unsaid gives it the opportunity to fester, and that's not healthy for anyone or any relationship. Which ties nicely into the next point. Are you considerate and compassionate with your honesty? And this is something he does specially note, where he says, we fall in love not only because we feel affection for our partner, but because of the way their affection makes us feel. Perhaps that's why it stings so much more when your romantic partner criticizes you. You didn't just gain a critic, you lost a cheerleader. And like, there's a way to say things, right? Ultimately, that's what this point comes down to. You can and should be honest, and you should also, like, I hope goes without saying, be in a relationship where you feel like safe enough to be honest and can do that. Duh. But even when you are, you should still be nice about your honesty. Like, it's not uncommon to know someone who says that they are so honest and they're so upfront and they're so like straightforward and they're blunt and that's just who they are as a person, and you know, they try and sell you that as like a positive about them. Actually, it just means that usually they're an asshole and they use being blunt and being straightforward and being honest as a cover to just be mean. There are ways to say things without being mean, and that's why it's important here, because like when it's your romantic partner and they've now become your critic instead of your cheerleader, like, it hurts. It's already like an uncomfortable feeling to have that conversation where it's like, hey, this thing you did upset me. Why would you make it 10 times worse, 100 times whatever, by being mean about it? I think the beginning bit of this quote is also really interesting. We fall in love not only because we feel affection for our partner, but because of the way their affection makes us feel. And yeah, I think fundamentally, love is selfish. Romantic love is selfish. There's an element of that we don't talk about. Yes, I feel love for this person, but I also love that the way this person makes me feel. And like, I mean, we kind of do talk about it when we talk about like, I love the way you make me feel, but I just feel like it's not acknowledged nearly enough, you know? And finally, the last core component when it comes to your marriage is, do you make sure you prioritize what you two think and feel above everyone else? As he puts it, what you think and feel about your marriage and what your spouse thinks and feels about your marriage should compose 90% of what matters. It's the two of you who live with the success and play your decisions, and everyone else, aside from kids, is a stunningly distant second or last place. The two of you are supposed to be partners in crime. It happens too frequently that problems arise because we let other voices into the relationship, not what you and your partner thinks. And I don't just mean like the people around you, I also mean like social media and how, for example, women are like being red-pilled more effectively under the guise of like not even tradwifery. I mean like even in less ostensibly offensive content about like femininity and wanting to be stay at home and whatever else. I can't think of relevant examples right now off the top of my head, but you know what I mean. There's a really big culprit in the voices coming in that are messing with the 98% between you and your partner about what you think and feel about your relationship. Another thing I think is really important to acknowledge as someone from an Indian family is family. There is a saying, and I don't think it's culture specific, but you don't marry the person, you marry the family. And that is so true. There is a reason why it's cliche. In the book, he does talk about the involvement of in-laws and how marriage used to be a thing that was more like of a business transaction, historically speaking. He's talking about it from a Western perspective, but if we just go with it for now. And then he talks about how economic and technological developments basically altered the idea of marriage. So it became more of a thing to express romantic love than it did to be a business transaction. That change really came about in the Victorian era. I don't particularly know why that is right now. It's something I would like to read and get into, but all I know is that this thing happened in the Victorian era, which I also think is significant when it comes to India and Indian families, because like the Victorian era was very significant for British colonialism in India and left a lasting effect and impact on the subcontinent in many ways. So how these new Victorian ideas of marriage interacted with like Indian ideas of marriage, and how those are fused and like shaped the Indian idea of marriage today would be a very interesting thing to look at. I don't know enough about it at this point in time, and I wish I did. But that's also a separate conversation to be had another day. The point is, he goes on to say, when you marry, you're marrying your partner's whole family dysfunction. That is an underlying truth you can't get away from. So it's really important, like as much as we put thought into this, the kind of partner I want them to be doing this, that, whatever, blah, 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 the third. It's also really important to think about the kind of family the person has. I don't mean go into it with like a list the same way you would for a partner. I personally don't think that's helpful. I think it's more important to, when you meet the partner, or meet the person, observe the family, and then see, like just observe, don't judge. This is also advice I've heard repeated elsewhere, but I agree with it. And be aware of what you're potentially getting into. See how your partner feels about it, how you can work together and communicate to deal with that problem, and make sure that what you both think about your marriage, 98% of that is coming from you two, your marriage or relationship. 98% of that is coming from you two and not from anyone else. Like, take stock of the situation. Be smart about it. One thing that I think is worth noting here in particular is that he talks about marriage as a tool. As an institution, you don't have to use it the same way that everybody else does. Your marriage is a unique union of two unique individuals. So if you two decide to do things a certain way and you're happy to do that, and like that's what works for you, it doesn't matter what other people think ultimately, right? Because they're not in the marriage, and yet people are so happy and so quick to give their 2 pence on whatever it is. This is where I feel it's really important to have boundaries and to ultimately be like, look, this is none of your business. It doesn't really matter what you think about it. It doesn't concern you. This is between me and my partner. We will sort it out. Trust that we have talked about it and we have to come to a decision that works for both of us. But also, more than that, having that boundary to not even talk about these things in the first place. Not making these things public knowledge. As soon as you make things public knowledge, you tell someone something, you've invited them to criticize. So don't even give them that option in the first place. Don't tell them what you're doing. It's none of their business. Don't be in a position where you have to tell them it's none of their business. Just make it none of their business from the beginning. For your own sanity and peace of mind. The Take has a really good video about Claire Dunphy from Modern Family, which I will link in the show notes, talking about how she takes on the like stereotypical mother role, like housewife role, stay-at-home mom. She does the thing and that is more societally expected for whatever reason, but actually she's more suited to being the more like dominant masculine breadwinner personality in the relationship with Phil, and Phil is more nurturing and more like stereotypically feminine. He has those qualities, but he still goes out and does the male thing. And what I'm trying to say, they start out the show doing their societally expected roles, but ultimately they are happy that their relationship is more peaceful once they actually do the roles that fit their individual personalities. So that's what I'm saying. Conversely, you look at like Jay and Gloria in the same show. Jay is a more stereotypical masculine man, does the masculine, like is the breadwinner, and Gloria, stay-at-home mom, is more stereotypically feminine and nurturing than him. But the point is, by the end of the show, they both design marriages that work for their individual personalities, their individual relationships. So marriage is a tool. You can use it in a way that suits you and suits your partner and your relationship. It doesn't have to be one size fits all. And I guess to wrap up this whole segment on the core components and how much they center on communication, Sexton says, marriage is not hard work as long as you don't consider paying attention hard work. And I think that's mostly what it comes down to. I feel like this is an area where men, in particular, in heterosexual marriages, get tripped up because they're not paying attention. And then marriage is hard. Marriage is not hard if you're paying attention. It's really simple. I think, actually, this is a good time of year to be posting this episode because we will see with Christmas presents how much people were paying attention. And obviously that applies to whoever you're giving a gift to at this time of year, but I think in particular in relationships, and I think we notice it more because everyone's giving gifts at this time of year. So you'll notice the gifts you get from your partner compared against the gifts you got from your parents, compared against the gifts you got from your siblings, compared against the gifts you got from your friends. It's all like in one bubble. Not bubble, like pot. That's just like simmering away. It's right conditions for you to notice, basically, how much your partner is paying attention to you. But yes, marriage is not hard, as long as paying attention isn't hard. I want to touch on kids as one final topic. They come up quite a bit in the book, but I haven't talked about the things he says about kids on purpose because it's a bit ahead of my aims. Like, I'm mostly talking about dating and being married, right? Getting married. You might not want children, but if you do, you have to consider that this person is not only the parent of your children. Will they do things? Will they look after you? Will they look after the kids, etc.? You also have to consider how they would be in the event of a divorce. And this goes back to not saying things that can be held against you. If I go back to the quote from earlier, the one piece of advice you would offer all his future clients is keep in mind how your behaviour would look if you're being cross-examined. Kids are often used as weapons in divorce proceedings to hurt the other parent. You don't want to be in a relationship with that kind of person. Granted, you don't know how they're going to deal with that situation, like, up front, and it's very difficult to tell. You can do your due diligence to at least make sure it doesn't seem like something they would reasonably do. This is especially true if you're a woman who wants to be married to a man, and if you think there's any chance you might not work outside the home after marriage or after having kids. Make sure you're protected, make sure you're communicating regularly about things like the finances and whatever, etc. The things I touched on earlier, so that you have the best possible chance. Alright. I have been recording for a very long time. I've actually had to record this episode over 3 separate occasions, so it has been a very long process. The length of this clip alone is ridiculously long, let alone once I actually put the 3 together. But that was a very comprehensive overview of this book. This book was great. Again, let's look at how many tabs I have. That is how many notes there were. It was a goldmine. A veritable goldmine. I would recommend this to anyone who is looking to get into a long-term relationship, looking to get married. I think a lot, like I said, I think the points apply to long-term relationships as well. But especially if you're about to get married, like next time I know someone who's getting married, I'm going to give them this. This wraps up the first episode of Book Club. So if you are still listening, please let me know what you thought. Do you like the format? Was it a bit too quote heavy? I would understand if it was. I didn't really want to be reading out the quotes as much. Like, I made the notes, but I didn't want to be reading them directly. It was just like, he just phrases things so well. Like, this book was just so well written. I really liked it. I really like that you can hear his voice in the way he writes, because if you watch a couple of his interviews, like he did Soft White Underbelly, and I've seen him do other interviews as well. He was also on Diary of a CEO. So if you watch those interviews and you hear how he talks and then you read this, you're like, okay, yeah, you wrote in your voice. It's actually very well written in that way, because it makes me feel like, hey, I could write it in my voice. It doesn't need to like be that deep, you know, or be that fancy just because I'm writing a book. It makes it seem doable, which I think is a mark of good writing. Not the only mark, but it is a mark. But yes, let me know what you thought of the new format. I will be back with a new episode of Book Club. I will have decided by the time this episode goes live, so it will be on the screen right now if you're watching the video version of this podcast, or it'll be in the show notes if you are listening on audio. And I think that is everything. I hope this was useful. I literally made 9 pages of notes for this episode.